tuned to the early romantic period of a young man of deep sensibility, very thoughtful, philosophical, unable to act because he's just sort of willowy and nervous, kind of a nerdy guy, really. It's very tempting, I think of this as more revealing about Coleridge himself than about Hamlet. It's a fine picture of Coleridge, who did have a problem with getting things done. He had a serious drug habit and couldn't finish his poems and so on in some cases. Famously, Kubla Khan broken off in the middle of what he was writing it because of a knock at the door and so on. So for Coleridge to see Hamlet as a wispy, introspective, philosophical poet, it is beautiful for the romantic period. Now it would go, again, with getting rid of the scene in which Hamlet is attempting to kill Claudius in cold blood. So this scene just goes. And, this is going back into David Garrick's version. That's one of the casualties of that moment. Now, something else that we have to worry about with Hamlet, in terms of tidying up the play, is his responsibility for the death of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Right? When he takes them off, well, he goes with them to England. It's not his, of course, he's being taken. And then he comes to him to check and discover that they have on them a document ordering his execution by the King of England on behalf of the King of Norway, Denmark, excuse me. And he changes, because he's learning proper sort of penmanship when he was young, and so on. He substitutes names and sends them to their deaths. And later on, when he's telling the story to Horatio says, well, goodness, that's quite a story. And Hamlet says, well, they're not near my conscience. He said, that did make a lot of disappointment. But it's another wonderful, problematic ethical thing in terms of trying to make Hamlet into a pure, romantic, philosophical hero for the play. So the story of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern can be dispensed with, especially that trip to England. And that disappears in David Garrick's version. It's gone for a good part of the 19th century. With Macready, for example, Charles Macready, on down through Henry Irving. And they all tended to tidy up the play this way. One interesting sidelight about that, I'll talk a little bit about modern versions, including film versions. One of the most attractive to me is the year 2000, a film by Michael Almereyda, which is sometimes called Hamlet 2000. And it's done in modern dress and also modern setting. Hamlet's a film geek, and Ophelia is wired for sound so that her father can overhear her conversations with Hamlet and so on. Wonderful use of modern technology. And one of the most amusing touches having to do with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, when they are taking him to England, they're on an overnight flight. Probably didn't know the overnight flight from England to Denmark, but never mind that. They're sacked out in their seats and so on, and it suddenly occurs to them that it'd be a good time to check their luggage. So he goes up to the luggage rack, pulls it down, opens up. I'll be darned. There it is. He opens up the laptop, and there it says, to be executed. So he simply backspaces, types in their name. So isn't that a wonderful application of modern? Another nice touch from that film has to do with the ghost, who is played by Sam Shepard. A wonderful performance, and it was wonderful he took part in this with a very young director, Michael Almereyda. Hamlet's ghost, Hamlet Sr., is seen as a figure who appears on the inter-house security system on television screens in the great stone concrete castles of Manhattan. Isn't that lovely? Now, so another point about the story of Ophelia that becomes very marked in terms of the history of production and interpretation has to do with her suicide and burial. I say suicide, but of course I'm begging a question by saying that, don't I? What is one to make of her death? Of course, the beginning of the fifth act of the grave diggers are talking about whether it's to be called a suicide or not. There's been some nice work done lately on why that issue comes up. It turns out that since most people were unable to swim at the time the play was written, that going in the water was regarded, legally at least, as tantamount to taking the risk of your own life. and could be considered a suicidal attempt. And very importantly, if the jury found for suicide, or the coroner, that the estate would then go to the crown. So there was a huge impetus on juries and on coroners to be able to find for suicide. Now, as the play tells us, it's a very interesting moment. It's another one of these inset things where we've not shown the action on stage, but the death of Ophelia. The Gertrude comes in with an account, very distraught, and relates this beautiful set piece, this purple passage of poetry and song, good recitation piece, and to the king and to Laertes. And that's how we learn how Laertes learns about the death of his sister. Well, that starts to bother people, especially in the 18th century. Did she jump in? Did she fall in? The account says that an envious sliver broke on the tree where she was, and then she floated for a while. And of course, there's this famous picture that's on the advertisement. Notice of this talk today. This beautiful picture by Everett Millay from the early 1860s of Ophelia in this gorgeous Pre-Raphaelite painting, which is in the old Tate in London. It's not in the modern Tate on the other side of the river, the one that's down in Chelsea. Wonderful, wonderful painting, I think, and with all the flowers of Pre-Raphaelite style, so exquisitely detailed along as she floats along the bank, in the stream. Well, and she's singing songs until Gertrude says that she's pulled from her melodious lay to muddy death. Well, what did happen? How did we account for the fact that Gertrude knows about this and can report it without her reporting having done anything? That started to bother people. And there is, in fact, an etching from the middle of the 18th century that attempts an answer for this. It shows in the foreground a tree with branches and so on, and Ophelia grabbing and about to fall. And on the farther bank, there are three feminine figures, one of whom would appear to be the queen, looking a little agitated and probably with her ladies in waiting. They're very small in the etching, so you can't really be sure who they are. But it looks as though the hypothesis is that Gertrude is imagined to have seen this from the other side of the bank or something, so that she couldn't get there in time. Even that's a little bit of a stretch, isn't it? Because the account that she gives says that she floated for quite a time, singing mad snatches until she was pulled down to this muddy death. It's really finally hard to explain, isn't it? But it's easy to see how you, again, would find that troublesome to 19th century audiences in terms of interpreting what to make of her story. This is such a wonderful icon. Something to say about this painting representations from Hamlet. They start to become, graphic illustrations start to become very prominent, especially the late 18th, early 19th century. Alderman Boydell in London put together a Shakespeare gallery, a set of etchings from paintings and so on, that more or less 6 or 7 to each play throughout the whole canon, including Henry the Sixth Part 2, and that sort of thing. And they're quite wonderful, many of them. And one thing they demonstrate is that what artists came to appreciate and wanted illustrated, especially in the 19th century during the Romantic period, were scenes that Shakespeare had off stage and didn't present visually in the theater, so that there was a room for an artist to be able to visualize something that Shakespeare verbalizes but doesn't pictorialize in the stage. A good example of this would be the 7 Ages in the so-called 7 Ages of Man of Jake's in As You Like It, or the story of Jake's sobbing about the weeping deer in As You Like It. Those are all favorite subjects. And in Hamlet, by far the favorite object of pictorial representation is the death of Ophelia. Just countless numbers, especially late 19th, early 20th century. And then there's the film version by Olivier, which has Jean Simmons as Ophelia. And if you've seen it, if you remember at all, it's